Welcome to Garda Vetting information for early learning and care and school-aged childcare services from the National Child Safeguarding Programme. This session will explore the following in relation to Garda Vetting: legislation, recruitment and selection, important points to note in vetting applications, who must be vetted in early learning and care and school-aged childcare services, the vetting procedure, the National Vetting Bureau of An Garda Síochána, recording and storing vetting information for early learning and care and school-aged childcare services, vetting disclosures by the National Vetting Bureau, vetting support for early learning and care and school-aged childcare services, and also some further resources. Legislation. Under the National Vetting Bureau Children and Vulnerable Persons Acts 2012 to 2016, it is compulsory for employers to obtain vetting disclosures in relation to anyone who is carrying out relevant work with children or vulnerable adults. Relevant work is defined as any work or activity which is carried out by a person, a necessary and regular part of which consists mainly of the person having access to or contact with children in a range of different roles as outlined in Schedule 1 of the Act. Further information on Garda vetting requirements can be found in the Early Learning and Care and School-Aged Childcare Regulations. Recruitment and selection. The Childcare Act 1991, Early Years Services Regulations 2016, specified that relevant services should have a recruitment policy which outlines the procedures that must be followed when hiring employees and unpaid workers. School-aged childcare regulations stipulate that Garda vetting is required in school-aged childcare services. Garda vetting is an important step in the recruitment and selection process. The Children First Act 2015 also specifies that providers of relevant services in their child safeguarding statement should outline procedures for recruitment that take into consideration the person's suitability to work with children. This includes obtaining a vetting disclosure from the National Vetting Bureau of An Garda Síochána, and providers must have consideration of the vetting disclosure received before a person is appointed, assigned, or allowed access to or contact with a child attending the service. Early learning and care and school-aged childcare services should have procedures in place to recruit and select staff that are suitable to work with children. Early Childhood Ireland and Barnardo's process Garda vetting on behalf of early learning and care services and school-aged childcare services. More information on this is provided later in this presentation. Further information on recruitment in early learning and care and school-aged childcare services can be found in the TUSLA Quality and Regulatory Framework. Important points to note in vetting applications. A vetting disclosure must be obtained and considered for any individual whose role brings them into regular contact with or access to children prior to their commencement in the service. Applications for vetting should not simply use generic terms to describe the role of the person wishing to be vetted, but a clear description of their functions with and access to children should be provided. This is imperative. Applications must state that the individual has duties that a necessary and regular part of which consists of having access to or contact with children whilst in the performance of their role. Who must be vetted in early learning and care and school-aged childcare services? Relevant work is any work or activity which is carried out by a person, a necessary and regular part of which consists mainly of the person having access to or contact with children or vulnerable adults. In early learning and care and school-aged childcare services, each employee, unpaid worker and contractor must be vetted, and some of these roles include the manager, practitioners, AIM support workers, students or volunteers, a cleaner if that person's work hours cross over with children's hours of attendance, a cook whose role may involve bringing food into rooms serving food to children, a maintenance person who regularly carries out duties while children are present, and visitors to the service for the purpose of activities such as dancing, yoga, sports, or other extra activities that might be offered that require regular access to or contact with children. The vetting procedure. Step 1. The applicant completes the vetting invitation form, NVB1, and provides proof of ID which is confirmed locally. Step 2. The NVB1 form and copies of ID are sent to the nominated liaison person in Barnardo's or Early Childhood Ireland, who submits details on the Garda vetting system. Step 3. The National Vetting Bureau sends the applicant an online link to complete the application, NVB2, and this link is live for 30 days. Step 4. The National Vetting Bureau will issue a disclosure to the nominated person in the Safeguarding Office. The applicant will be advised by the National Vetting Bureau that a disclosure has been issued. The National Vetting Bureau of An Garda Síochána. The National Vetting Bureau of An Garda Síochána issues vetting disclosures to organisations employing people who work in a full-time, part-time, voluntary or student placement basis with children and/or vulnerable adults. The National Vetting Bureau does not decide on the suitability of any person to work with children and vulnerable adults. Rather, in response to a written request for vetting, the National Vetting Bureau releases relevant criminal history and other specified information on the person to be vetted to the prospective recruiting organisation. Those who meet the criteria for Garda Vetting will receive a vetting disclosure. A vetting disclosure will include a statement that there is no criminal record or specified information in relation to the person being vetted, or details of all convictions and pending prosecutions and specified information. It is important to note that a disclosure of a conviction, pending prosecution and/or specified information will not automatically exclude someone from a position. These such disclosures will be considered in light of additional information for consideration. However, there are certain offences that will automatically exclude someone from working in early learning and care or school-aged childcare services. Recording and storing vetting information for early learning and care and school-aged childcare services. Garda vetting must be completed prior to a person being appointed, assigned or allowed access to or contact with children in an early learning and care or school-aged childcare service. The NVB1 form, copies of the applicant ID, the NVB disclosure and, if relevant, information relating to the decision-making process in cases of concerning information being disclosed will be kept on file. Vetting records should be held in a secure area as outlined in the service's record-keeping policy. The vetting subject will be given a copy of their disclosure by their manager. As per the TUSLA Quality and Regulatory Framework, vetting should be reapplied for every 3 years. Regulation 16 of the Childcare Act 1991, Regulations 2016, states that vetting records for staff should be held for a period of 5 years. This includes current staff and staff who are no longer employed in the service. Vetting disclosures by the National Vetting Bureau. There are 2 situations where Garda vetting may be refused. These are: 1. The role does not meet the requirements of the legislation. This means that the role does not involve regular access to and contact with children. Or 2. The application did not explicitly state that the applicant's role requires regular access to and contact with children. Should you have any questions relating to accessing Garda vetting, you should contact Early Childhood Ireland or Barnardo's as appropriate. Queries in relation to compliance with the Childcare Act 1991, Early Years Services Regulations 2016, or the Childcare Act 1991, Early Years Services Registration of School-Aged Childcare Services Regulations 2018 should be directed to the TUSLA Early Years Inspectorate. Evidence of unsuccessful applications for vetting must be kept on file for examination by the Inspectorate. Vetting. Support for early learning and care and school-aged childcare services. It is not permissible to allow anybody commence a role that requires regular access to or contact with children while they are awaiting vetting. It is against the law and subject to significant penalties under the National Vetting Bureau Children and Vulnerable Persons Act 2012 to 2016. Early learning and care and school-aged childcare services can obtain Garda vetting for staff members or volunteers through Early Childhood Ireland or Barnardo's vetting services. Both organisations will support services through the vetting process. Providers who are members of Early Childhood Ireland should contact Early Childhood Ireland directly, and providers who are not members of Early Childhood Ireland should make contact with Barnardo's. On this slide you will find further resources relating to Garda vetting. Links to these resources can also be found on the National Child Safeguarding Programme website, www.childsafeguardingelc.ie. Thank you for taking the time to listen to this webinar.